demo, you guys are going to be practicing how to make a landscape using Google Drawings. So to get started, make sure that you have the landscape tutorial file. So make sure that you make a copy of it so that way you can open it in your own Google Drawings and get started. So you'll notice that there is a working space for your photo. So we're going to be doing a simplified version of this desert scene. And what you're going to end up with is going to be something like this, where you can see like this is sort of the simplified or low poly version of this landscape. If I had, additional time to really go into it and tweak it, I would. But for the purposes of this, you really just want to be able to demonstrate that you can make layers, that you know how to change the color. You're also going to learn how to group your different objects and how to kind of slide your work over. So you'll notice that there is some discrepancies between color, and I'll go into a little bit about that as we start working. All right, so we're going to start in your file. And the first thing, to zoom in and zoom out, we're going to be doing a lot of zooming, is Control, Alt, plus, and minus. So this is different from some of the other features that you guys are used to, where it's just Control, plus, and minus. If you just use Control, plus, and minus, what you'll notice is that it will completely zoom in on the entire screen. You just want to zoom in on the landscape area or portion itself. All right. Let me zoom back out and set it back to normal. Control, Alt, plus. Okay, so now I can really kind of see my work. So step number 1 is you're going to want to work from the background to the foreground. Okay, you're going to look for, up here in your tools, right next to that arrow, the select arrow, you're going to be looking for the POLYLINE tool. The POLYLINE tool is basically creating polygon shapes to simplify your work. You'll notice that things are going to be a little bit rougher, kind of more jaggedy, and not quite as smooth using this method, but it's a way to simplify your overall landscape. So with this, think about it in the sense of like you're going to be working almost like with cut paper, and you're going to be cutting pieces of paper and layering them on top of each other with all these different shapes. And that's what creates this effect of feeling like you're going from a background, middle ground, and then foreground. So in here, I have my far background, which is just a very simple gradient. Then I have my middle ground, which is kind of these lighter color hills, and then I have my foreground, which is more simple up here. So with my POLYLINE tool, I'm going to line it up. So I want to find where it's going to connect, and there we go. So I often find the default tends to be a black outline with a blue fill color. For the purposes of this for right now, I am going to leave the fill transparent. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm just going to create some outlines first, and then I'm going to go in and fill in the color. So there is a lot of different ways to accomplish this. So if you feel like you work better by picking your color as you go, feel free to do that. But I'll show you guys one reason why I kind of like to do it in chunks. So the next thing I want to do is I want to kind of create this sort of background hill. So I'm going to make sure my POLYLINE tool is selected, and every time I click, it's creating a little segment or point. I'll tell you guys why that's important. So obviously the more segments or points that you use, the smoother your polygon shape is going to appear. The less anchor points that I have, the rougher my piece is going to appear. So let's roll over. Do this. Then I'm just going to kind of reconnect it down here. All right. So I know I completed my shape because it automatically filled for me. I'm going to make that transparent. So I also want to make sure that I get this bottom section. So again, remember that you want to build from background to foreground. So I kind of have my background overall flat shape. I have most of my middle ground. All right. So you'll notice that I can make alterations to this if I want to, but if I do that, then you'll notice that it's stretching my image. So just leave it as is, and then make one more box for the bottom section. So I'm going to zoom in just a hair. See that better. So as you can see, zooming is pretty important. I'm going to have this one overlap with my midpoint or middle ground. Oops. Alright, so that got messed up. So if you notice that something is getting kind of like all messed up, like it started just drawing lots of lines going back and forth, then you can always hit the select tool, and that will kind of help find or identify what shape you're making, and you can reset from there. Okay, back to my polyline tool. All right, so again, make this transparent. Select, order. I'm actually going to send this backwards one because I want this to actually be on top of this bottom space. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take these three shapes. So now I kind of laid out my background, my middle ground, my foreground sections. I'm going to arrange, group them together. So the nice thing about when you group something together, they operate all together. Okay. So I want to zoom out because I'm now going to establish the space right next to it. Okay. So if you notice, when I first move this around, I can move it just about everywhere. Okay. The problem with this is that I want to be able to align all of my different sections as I create them. So I want to go back to undo. That's just Control Z, very simple. If you hold down the Shift key, what the Shift key does that's really handy is that the Shift key will allow you to move just a portion, even in the group section. You notice I can only move it left to right, or once it's centered again, I can move it up and down. So that is the one real benefit utilizing the Shift key, because it'll help you make sure it's selected. Now, so as you can see, if I click off, I'm going to click on. So clicking on, I'm working with the group, but if I want to move my whole group together, I have to make sure each section is selected. So I hold down the Shift key, top, middle, bottom. I want to continue holding that Shift key and move everything over to the side. So now I know it's perfectly aligned with my original photo or my reference image. So I want to now zoom in a little bit. So first step, so now I'm going to ungroup them because I want to be able to work in each section. Okay, so the background. Now I want to pick a background color. One of the fun things is, instead of always working with solid tones, you may want to experiment or try working with gradients. So gradients are fun because you can do a lot of different things with them. So let's start with a gradient that's close-ish. Okay, so we've got these warm brownish tones or orangey tones, but it's way too dark. So I'm going to change the colors, the custom colors, make these custom, and I'm going to work with a really light orangish tone, kind of like the sky. Okay, and then this is kind of too bright. I'm going to soften this tone down as well. So something like that, really similar to here. I can also play with, in these different customs, the direction of the gradient. So the angle will change the direction of the gradient. So I think I want it coming from the right hand side, or like the bottom right. Let's see if I can get something similar to that. All right, so that looks pretty close with the lighter area on the bottom. Probably go a little bit lighter. A little bit more yellowy. And this one, change it. So every time I'm picking a new color, it's like it's creating that color as a custom color. Good starting point. So now I'm going to essentially repeat the process, but now I want to break down these, I'm going to basically do passages or sections. So if you have a more complex image, you can kind of really break down your sections, make sure you group everything, hold down that shift key, and slide it over into place. So you're going to see that as I'm now working. Noticing as I'm making these different shapes, this one I'm going to make in the far background, this one's going to be kind of like the next layer coming forward, and so because this layer is now going to come forward, I don't like this awkward slant that's happening here. So in order to fix that, you just double click on that section, and then all those little anchor points that you made, you can then move them around. So obviously the more anchor points that you have, the more you can kind of fix or adjust different parts of your work. So while I wouldn't suggest going overboard on your anchor points, make sure that you're definitely using enough that you can really fill in that space. All right, so I'm going to zoom out. So now that I made a couple more, I'm going to use that shift, and this is why that shift is so important to move this over. So one of the things I highly recommend is as you work in different sections, make sure that one of those sections is connected to an edge. So as you can see, like I'm now kind of giving that suggested look of all those different hills in the background. Now I want to work on this section. So I'm going to kind of speed through this section so you can kind of see what it looks like. I have my low poly, very simple desert scene. For your final, obviously I expect a little more detail, like challenge yourself with some mountains or some other foreground elements. So the key here is really thinking about those anchor points. So if I'm going to go back in and maybe smooth this one out, I can just double click and move my anchor points around. I cannot add any anchor points once my shape has been created. Okay, so to turn in your work, you first want to do a screenshot. So I'm going to do a quick screenshot of my workspace, so that way I can see the original work, the work that I was doing, and that's fairly simple. The next thing I want to do is actually want to make a new drawing. So I'm going to do landscape tutorial. So, finished. Okay, so my finished version, and you'll do the same thing when you do your finished piece, is you're going to go down to File, Page Setup, Custom. So we're going to actually set up our custom images. Because this is a landscape format, we're going to be doing 17 by 11 inches. So that'll give us a nice poster style of our work. So I'm going to go ahead and select. So another way to select everything is you'll notice that if I hold down my left cursor, I can select a bunch of things at once. Let's say I accidentally select, everything. If I hold down the control key, I can deselect one individual piece at a time. So I next want to copy, Control C, Control V to paste. And since this whole thing is already selected, I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and I want to make this really fill the space. Now I want to actually go slightly outside of the border because my edges, as you can see, they're a little rough. So now I can go to File. I'm going to be downloading this as a PNG. So when I look at my final image, alright, so I need to go a little bit further on these sides. I notice that I have a little bit of a error here where I could have extended this and brought this down and smoothed this out a little bit more. So really have that critical eye as you're working. That'll make your work go from something that looks kind of meh to something that looks really nice and cohesive. Okay, so if I want to, I can go in and do these small little fixes. Just by gently altering those anchor points. Okay, Alright, Control Alt minus, zoom out again. I want to select everything. Hold down that Shift key. Just a hair bigger. Download. So let's check my new download. Okay, so that's much cleaner. I noticed that over here I still have a little bit of a rough edge, but for the demo, this works just fine. You can also clean up your rough edges. Select everything. Out. Select everything. And let's see here. Let's see if I can crop this. Tools. Okay. So if I want to, I could create a border to clean it up. Okay, so I've cleaned up my work. Check it once again. So now I've got a nice, clean, smooth edge on all sides. I fixed that little error. Now I feel like I'm good to go. So version 3 is the one that I will be submitting. So just submit both of your finished PNG file as well as your screenshot. And that concludes this tutorial. Thanks for watching.